So it's never going to get better. As opposed to the God who is infinitely wise and takes us through paths we would never choose, but does so because he knows this will be the pathway both to your growth and fulfilling my purposes through you in the building of the kingdom. Trusting the hand of God that is wise and good and loving is so different than thinking God does his best. But if he knew now what, if he knew, what am I trying to say? If he knew then what he knows now, he would never have given this advice. Oh my, what despair there is in that. So my friends, it is so comforting to know that God does know the future, and we trust him. We trust him with the difficulties in life that come. Boy, we've got a man in our church right now who left a high six-figure salary. High six-figure salary. He was a COO of an insurance corporation. He left it all, gave most of their money away to missions and other causes, came to seminary to study, and within 1 year, he has contracted a form of resurgent polio that he had. He had polio as a child, a resurgent polio by which he is just diminishing in his life daily. It is incredible to see him just wither as a man right in front of our eyes. And yet you talk to Tom Rogstad. Oh my, what confidence he has in God's good and wise hand that is doing in his life what is best for his conformity to the likeness of Christ and building up of the body of Christ through the suffering God intended for his life. What a huge difference this is in understanding that. Finally, prayer and hope with the God who doesn't know the future. Again, similar to the Arminian view, I mean, why pray if God can't intervene and do anything? Well, in openness, God can intervene. But still, here's the problem. We still have libertarian freedom. You still have the problem in the open theist view of God the gentleman, right? So he's made natural law. All this stuff we talked about in Arminianism is still there. He made natural law. He seldom interferes with it. He gave us libertarian freedom. He seldom interferes with it. So, what are you asking God to do? Even though in open theism, he actually can intervene and do something. In classic Arminianism, he can't. Open theism, he can. But he won't because he respects our freedom. And given that, there really is nothing you could pray and ask God to do that you would actually expect him that he would intervene and do. So it just absolutely cuts the legs out of fervor and confidence in praying, because you realize God has made an agreement, he's not going to interfere. So why pray? Yeah, I don't understand how thoughtful Arminians can face life this way, but they do. Okay. Well, let me do we have a few minutes we could take a question or two? Would that be all right before we break? We talked about a lot last night and this morning in regard to Arminianism and open theism. And I just wonder if any of you want to ask a question or make a comment that would help us kind of think about some of this together before we break for lunch. Yes, sir. Well, I've been with these guys a lot, and Greg Boyd in particular, John Sanders too, some, and their responses are essentially to reassert things that they affirm. For them, the concept of libertarian freedom is non-negotiable. They will not give on that. And because of that, they are convinced God cannot know the future. Again, going back to the beginning of our thing this morning, that if God knows the future exhaustively, we can't be free. The only way we really can be free is if he doesn't know what we're going to do before we do it. And so their commitment to libertarian freedom is really, in my judgment, what drives so much of this. And so, honestly, biblical kinds of responses fall on deaf ears, because if this means you're challenging my whole model that's built on libertarian freedom, I'm not willing to go there. So that's essentially what happens. Yes, sir, please.
Just to get a little bit of clarity.
Yeah.
What is the Armenian view on Peter's three denials?
The Arminian view of Peter's three denials. They would say, now this is Arminian, not open theist. The Arminian would say, yes, Jesus is God. He knew that Peter would deny him, and Peter did deny him, and there's no problem with that. So because in the Arminian view, God does have exhaustive foreknowledge. So he declared in advance what would take place according to his foreknowledge. It's the open theist that has the bigger problem here. You know, Greg Boyd tries to say Jesus could not have known, in a strict sense, he could not have known that Peter would deny him 3 times. So what it was a really good educated guess. The problem with that is 3. I mean, you might have a good educated guess that, you know, under fire Peter would cave. But 3? I mean, why not 1? Why not 5? Why, 3? That's the killer. So it really makes that a preposterous proposal to say that was a good guess. Is that getting at what you're asking?
Yeah.
See, the Arminian is very simple. God has foreknowledge. He just knows it. The open theist is the one who has the harder time and really has no answer for it that is satisfying. Yes, sir.
Have you seen churches or institutions going from like a conservative view and being influenced towards this? And
Yes.
Why do they, from your point of view, why does that happen? What is it that why do they embrace that?
Yes. Again, institutions that are already committed to a fundamental Arminian structure, model. So you're committed to the universal love of God. You're committed to, as the only kind of love there is, and you're committed to libertarian freedom. So you're an Arminian institution. Well, there is a tendency to move in an open theist direction because thoughtful Arminians are aware of these problems. The problem of exhaustive, definite foreknowledge and freedom. The problem of exhaustive, definite foreknowledge and providence, providential governance. And so for both of those reasons that we mentioned at the beginning of this, they are weighty. They weigh upon these thoughtful Arminians, and they realize both of these problems can be solved with one little adjustment. Just give up exhaustive, definite foreknowledge, and all of a sudden, freedom is reestablished, and God can actually do something in the world if he wants to. So that's the attraction, I think. Some also, I think this is lesser in impulse, but some also are attracted to open theism because they think it does a better job solving the problem of evil. Now you tell me if you think it's better. But here, for example, Hitler. Think World War II and the Holocaust. Here's the open theist response. God didn't know. I mean, number one, he didn't know when he created the world that there would be a Holocaust. True enough, and I will grant them that's fine. I mean, that's a long ways out from the beginning of creation. But it's also true that God knew what Hitler was thinking. He knew the growing popularity of Hitler. He knew the plans Hitler put in place if he ever was elected the prime minister in Germany. And he knew all of that. He knew what Hitler intended when Auschwitz was being built, right? And yet he didn't do anything about it. So the answer, but God didn't know what was going to happen. He didn't know the evil that was going to take place. Strikes me as superficially an answer to that problem. Because as you get closer to hand, goodness, we can tell what's going on. Don't you think God can tell what's going on in this? And he is omnipotent and does nothing about it. And again, from their vantage point, God doesn't ever want this kind of thing to happen. Why doesn't he intervene and bring omnipotent power to bear in stopping this? And they have no answer for that. I mean, what they cannot give is the answer a Calvinist gives. Namely, God knows this horrid evil that will take place will actually redound to the glory of God and bring greater good in the end through it than apart from it. That's a Calvinist answer. The Arminian can never do that because that means God intends the evil for good. And that is anathema to them. They would never say that. Because God doesn't ever want evil, period. That's why evil is always, remember the word last night? Gratuitous, pointless, purposeless. Wow. Okay, one or two more? Yes, please. What, I'm sorry?
When his divine exhaustive knowledge is denied.
Right.
We're going to find that there's a lot of other doctrines of God that has to be also documented. How do they have this picture?
Yes. Well, for example, another attribute of God that has to be qualified is the wisdom of God. I mean, you think again of Suzanne's story. How wise was it of God to lead Suzanne to marry this guy when, if he knew now what he knew then, he wouldn't have done this, right? So, or did I say that in the reverse way? What he knew then, if he knows now, he wouldn't have done this. So you have to redefine the wisdom of God. And really, what you end up saying then of God is that he ends up being a lot more like us than we ever thought, right? It really does. I mean, one of my little books on open theism is called "Their God is Too Small," undermining confidence in God through open theism. It really does bring God more down to our level, and but part of the attraction of that is it also helps us feel better about ourselves. You know, there's not as much disparity between God and us, as if that's a good thing. But you know, some people are inclined to go that direction. Someone else, yes, please. Eschatology, yeah. I read a paper on this at ETS a few years back because I just thought, wow, this is really fascinating. Essentially, they have no eschatology because God can only declare what, you know, in terms of exacting prophecy of what he has unilateral control over. Well, how much does God have unilateral control over? It involves nothing in human affairs. You know, nothing at all. And, you know, they might say, well, what about the return of Christ? Well, here's my response to that. Does Christ have libertarian freedom? Well, if he does, then when the Father says time to go, he might choose otherwise. I mean, even that, God the Father could not know. No. He could not know, because it depends upon if Christ is going to agree. I mean, this is what Sanders says in the Garden of Gethsemane when Jesus says, not my will, but thine be done. That's when the Father knew Jesus would go to the cross. He didn't know until then, at the Garden of Gethsemane, that the cross would happen. Well, same thing then for the second coming of Christ. How would he know until Christ says, okay, I'll go? So, I mean, really there is pitiful little in eschatology that you could say God has decreed that will take place. The best he can do is give probabilities of what he hopes will happen, but stay tuned. You know, because adjustments may be in order, depending on what happens here.